Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We're presented by Full Press Coverage, and we're joined today by our friend, special guest Mike Molyneaux, on a day that there's not too much to talk about. Pretty boring. I think we're going to talk mostly about Dame Lillard hitting a bunch of crazy shots last night, and LeBron leaving the game with 5 minutes left to go. Nothing happening with the Celtics. No, of course we're going to talk just about the Celtics today. Huge news, obviously, as I woke up to a text message from John Sapachetti and on a thread with Sap and Mike about Danny Ainge retiring, Brad Stevens being elevated from coach to general manager, and the search for the next head coach of the Celtics is underway. Not how I thought things were going to play out. So my initial reaction was shock, and I have a lot of opinions about this, as you would guess. I know Mike and Sap do as well. So I will turn the floor over to Mr. Sapachetti. First reaction when you heard the news, Sap.
Well, I was actually at the barbershop, so I'm sitting there and I get a text from my nephew. He texts me the tweet from Shams that Danny Ainge was retiring, stepping down, whatever way you want to phrase it, and that Brad Stevens was going to be now president of basketball operations. And then the conversation led to the guys at the barbershop, me trying to debate them, that LeBron's greater than Michael Jordan. But I didn't want to get into that too deep, especially after last night's loss by the Lakers. But it was somewhat surprising. They had scissors. That's right. And by the way, why do I have to pay $25 for this haircut? I mean, this is a 2-buzz, which took about 20 minutes, $25, 30 with the tip. I know, the barbershops were closed down for a while a year ago because of COVID, but let's get back to normal prices. I should basically go to the old man barbershop where, there's an old Italian guy there and charges you $12 or whatever. But nonetheless, $25 for this lovely haircut. I look like, Curly on the Three Stooges. But my first reaction was somewhat surprised, but not shock. We've talked about this, Jet, and Mike, I know we've talked about it as well. I'm not surprised that Ainge is gone, and I don't know if this is necessarily his choice. I think he was probably weighing this for a while, because how many times have we said that 2 years ago he suffered that second heart episode and that he didn't seem to be as into the job as before? 62 years old, 6 kids, 17 grandkids, a second heart episode. I think he lost some steam, and you need all the energy you can to do that job. It's a 365 day job, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You need to be totally invested. I also think it was really damaging what he said last week when he went on with Toucher and Rich on 98.5, the Sports Hub. And first of all, I don't think it was a good look that he was at the golf course, between games 2 and 3. Not that you have to sit in the office 24 hours, but you do a weekly hit with a radio station. Do it on a hard line or through an ISDN line or through Zoom or something, then set your tee time up for later. Danny Ainge is pretty well connected. I'm sure he could have got later tee times. It was not a good look, but worse than that was what he had to say when he was asked about race issues in Boston with players. He said, 26 years, I never heard of such a thing. And my first thing is, one of your current players, Marcus Smart, wrote a real lengthy piece on the Players Tribune last year detailing it. Like, you didn't know about that? Not that you read the Players Tribune, but someone in that front office or someone in the organization, I don't know, maybe even an intern, someone in media relations, sort of read that and got that right to Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens, say, we've got a problem here. Maybe we have to address it. That was a bad look. And he kind of dismissed it. He was aloof. And then over the next couple of days, the Sports Hub unearthed some video of him at a conference, and he was asked about players talking about social issues. He goes, I don't really pay attention to them. They're kind of like the liberals in Hollywood. And Woj reported on Friday that the other league executives are like, what the hell? That's not a good look. You're in a league that's 85% black, and the chief executive of the Boston Celtics is talking like that. How do you go recruit any free agents going forward? I thought that was a really bad look. I don't think it sit well with Wick Grossbeck. In fact, if you watch the press conference, Danny says, I'll have more time to golf now. And Wick kind of snidely said, well, you've been doing that anyway. Well, maybe it was a joke, but maybe there was a little bit of seriousness to that. I think he was pretty much dismissed at this point. And as far as Brad Stevens, you have him on the books for 6 years at $7 million a year. You're not going to fire him. So you promote him. Now he's the president of basketball operations. See what happens there. You're not going to just write him a $42 million check and let him go coach, I don't know, the Indiana Pacers or somewhere else. And
I would.
again, well, rich people don't like to write $42 million checks and wish someone well in their next endeavor. So I think that's pretty much what happened today. I think both guys were dismissed. If you guys saw the press conference, did Danny Ainge look really happy and relieved? No, he looked kind of pissed off sitting up there. I don't think Brad Stevens looked comfortable in his new role. And Wick and Steve Pagliuca looked like they were being held hostage. It was not a comfortable situation. I think there's a lot more underneath the surface here than just, Danny's going to retire and play golf and be with the family, and that, Brad is all engaged in being the president of basketball operations. Brad Stevens has been nothing but a coach for the last 20 plus years. He's a coach. That's what he feels like. And now he's going to be doing something different. Do we even know if he's qualified to do that? I think it's kind of fishy what took place today.
All right, Mike, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I was at work in my office and the tweet popped up and I completely lost it. I might have dropped a few expletives and I probably shouldn't have been doing that at my place of employment. But that's just how shocked I was when the news dropped. In Jet, you've brought me over to the side the last couple of years in terms of calling for Danny Ainge's head. We wanted to see Danny Ainge gone, and at first I was like, well, maybe Danny can still has some of that 08 magic in there. Maybe he can. And then as the years progressed, I've reached the point, especially this year, and there was no time for me during the middle of the season where like, oh, it's All-Star break. Okay, this team's definitely. I was fed up, and in all honesty, I'm a Celtics fan through and through. But I tell you, as I continue to watch the games and cheer them on, in a sense, I was checked out with this team from the offseason. I never was fully, I was engaged. I'm a fan. I watched the games, but I there was no type of true joy and excitement, because seeing how Danny Ainge constructed this team coming out of the offseason, but before one ball even went into a hoop or was even dribbled on the court, I was clocked out on this team in a sense. And it's because Danny Ainge had this team taking not one, not two, but several steps back from the previous years. And it just came to a point in my mind where, one, Danny Ainge, and Sap, you alluded to this a little bit, I feel as if, and these most recent issues with him making the comments about the race and whatnot, it just seems like he's past his time. His time is come and gone, and he's just not in tune with what's going on anymore. And maybe the players run. I mean, that's not his fault necessarily. That's just how time works and how things evolve. And I think that played a part into Danny Ainge's situation and issues with this team the last couple of seasons, on top of the fact that for some reason he just fell in love with this idea of, I can draft guys and have them develop into something great. I can draft guys and we're going to trust our picks to turn into something great. And, we've seen over the last couple of seasons, his draft picks, other than Brown, Tatum, Smart, what has developed from these picks? Nothing. You look at the team this current season, I'm watching Milwaukee and Philadelphia and Brooklyn. They're adding guys. They're active in the buyout market. They're active in the trade deadline. Yeah, Danny Ainge went out and got, Evan Fournier and whatnot. They signed Jabari Parker, who I'm a fan of. I'll still continue to be a fan of. But for the most part, this team is over here relying on Grant Williams to step up in big minutes. They're relying on, we can't wait for Romeo Langford, who barely has played any professional basketball, to come back and be a huge part of the rotation. Or maybe we can get some great minutes from Carson Edwards off the bench. Maybe Ojale, who is essentially the same player since he's come into the league. Maybe this is the type of players that Danny Ainge continues to rely upon and fall in love with. I don't know why they signed back Taco Fall this past offseason. Made zero sense to me. Then you give Tremont Edwards or Carson, I don't know, Tremont Waters or Edwards.
Might as well combine their names. That's fine.
Yeah, pretty much. They're the same player, pretty much. You bring them back or give them the two-way contract, whatever you do. You give Ojale another contract. Like, what are you doing, Danny Ainge? What type of team are you building? And I've said this before with you guys. I've said it on other podcasts. it's two things that you have to choose from. You're either building a championship team or you're trying to rebuild. And Danny Ainge seems like he's lost in the middle at times. I mean, you have these two young stars in Tatum and Brown, but you still want to hope to develop Grant Williams and Romeo Langford. So to sum it all up, I just think this team was in need of a new voice, a new vision, a younger voice and a younger vision in at terms of GM and how you look at the league and how you view players and how you want to build a team. And I don't think it was Danny Ainge anymore. So I personally had said I saw Danny Ainge's time really being evaluated towards, a few years down the line when Tatum and Brown are a few years deeper into the contract. Like I always said, if you got nothing out of Tatum and Brown being on this team, then Danny Ainge really had to go. But the process sped up really quickly, and we found out today Danny Ainge is retired now. When it comes to Brad Stevens, a lot of people wanted him gone too. And I never jumped off the Brad Stevens train. I understood it was a tough season because the team just had a lot of issues. It wasn't built the right way. And I understand that the noise coming in of players are toning him out. But when you think about Brad Stevens' coaching mind, I think it slides in perfectly to a GM role. That's just my honest opinion. I think is him not being able to connect and get through to the players, is that probably true, especially over the course of the past? Probably. Brad Stevens is not a raw coach. A player messes up, he's not going to get in your face and you're supposed to cut here and do this play. No, Brad Stevens, all right, guys, good job, good effort. We'll get him on the next one. And that's just who he is. That's no real fault to him. That's no real detriment to him too much, in my opinion. But I think his basketball mind and the way that the league is built and set up now, he has a chance to be in the back and build a team that I think he has the opportunity to really develop and build a team that can translate into today's NBA with the players that he wants to get. I don't know what kind of vision Danny Ainge had in terms of bringing players in, but Brad will have the opportunity to get the players he wants that we believe can fit into the system and execute with a former player who I want to be a coach. And I think we'll get into that some more, but I think Brad Stevens will slide into a good position as GM with this team. I think it's going to work out perfectly for him.
Here's my initial problems with everything, and I obviously have been very vocal in wanting both Brad Stevens and Danny Ainge to go. I've been saying that for a while now, as Mike said, and Sap knows from doing the show with me for, I think we're on like about 80 episodes. It feels like every episode it comes up. It seems like, okay, one step forward, and now we're going to take a step backwards here. Ainge clearly, I think what he said in terms of race relations is just a microcosm of showing that he's been checked out. I don't think he's constantly doing the things that you need to do to be the head of basketball operations for a team. He's not interacting enough with the players, not getting caught up on all the news around the league. I don't think he's been active on the phones like he used to, trying to make trades. There's been a lot of veterans that have changed hands on teams for prices that the Celtics could have easily gotten involved in or better. The draft, for some reason, he's had this need to use virtually every pick, as opposed to, it's a lot easier to use the pick than to go out and try to shop it and make a trade. So I feel like he went the easier route there, as opposed to, really banging down doors and saying, hey, I have this pick and that pick and that pick. Let's make a deal. And I think earlier in his career, that was the sort of stuff that you would expect out of Danny Ainge. And so I think it was certainly beyond time for him to go. Now, as far as Brad Stevens being elevated to that role, I have a fundamental problem with when you do a bad job, then getting promoted. He had his worst coaching performance, I think, of his career this past season, and he is rewarded for it with a promotion to head of basketball operations. That's what it is. That is the boss of the coach. Yes, it is. He even described Danny Ainge as his boss. This is a promotion for Brad Stevens. It is. He's in charge of more. And I don't know, one, he has no experience doing it. And two, the experience that he does have, if you want to call it that, they said has been working in lockstep with Danny Ainge. So either he has no experience whatsoever, or he's partially responsible for this dumpster fire of a roster that they have right now. Sap?
This was just a money savings for the Boston Celtics. He's under contract for 6 years at $7 million per year. If they dismissed him today, they would owe him $42 million. Now, this offset language, if he signs elsewhere, maybe they could have traded him to the Indiana Pacers. Everyone talked about him going to the Indiana Hoosiers as head basketball coach. Well, Mike Woodson got that job a couple of months ago. Now we hear that trade him to Duke. Well, Mike Krzyzewski has got 1 year left at Duke. He's going to retire after the 21-22 season, but the next coach is already in place in John Shire, who's been the associate head coach. Duke likes to promote from within, so that's a done deal. So there were options for maybe exploring this if you're Rick Grossbeck. And who's to say a month from now, the Indiana Pacers don't get on the phone to Rick Grossbeck and say, yeah, we're interested in Brad Stevens. What would it take to get him as our next head coach? And Wick goes, you know what? I can get out of this $42 million commitment I have to Brad Stevens, and we'll find some other, president of basketball operations, or we'll split the position.
Well, they'd look like a circus sap, wouldn't they?
Well, it would. Yeah, absolutely. But this doesn't look all that great right now either. I'm more concerned is Mike Zarin going to still be involved?
Yes.
Is Austin Ainge going to still be involved? So
that's my problem.
What if actually have you done? I mean, you basically showed Danny Ainge the door. And I think it has a lot to do with what happened last week. And I'll say this about Kyrie Irving, whether you like him or not. He did more damage to this franchise, not just last week, but in his 2 years here. Kyrie Irving did more damage to this franchise than anything since the deaths of Len Bias and Reggie Lewis.
Oh, yeah, he's burned it down to the ground.
He's burned it down to the ground. He stomped on Lucky, which didn't offend me. I don't know if it offended you guys. I know it offended you, Jed. I don't know if it offended you, Mike, because here's the other thing that the Celtics have to learn, okay? This is 2021 right now. They got to get off this narrative of we went to 3 Eastern Conference finals in a 4-year period. No one cares. Okay. That's nothing to sell to other players, to your fans. No one cares. This is a franchise with 17 banners hanging in the rafters or right now, behind the backboards because they show them off during games. Although now with the fans in the stands, they're back in the rafters. No one even cares about those things. Like players in the league aren't going, I got to go play in Boston because they won 17 championships. That means nothing right now. Lucky means nothing on the floor. The players run over it during the course of a game. It's a symbol. It's a leprechaun. Average players today, most players today don't give an F about Lucky, the leprechaun. They really don't.
It's not about the leprechaun, Sap. It's not about.
No, but now you sound like Kevin Garnett, who I think is another guy that's out of touch. I don't. Did it seem to really piss off any of the Celtics right now that what Kyrie Irving did as he was, stomping on you for 39?
Which is an example of why this team is so flawed.
Soft.
But you guys have watched the NBA recently. That's the NBA. I mean, everybody's all up in arms. Now, here I am, the old guy who's supposed to be saying, well, back in my day, someone would have clotheslined Kyrie Irving. I mean, after the game last night, they were all hugging him. They love Kyrie Irving. Whatever he had to say last week, I bet the players supported him on that, with the exception of Jaylen Brown, who's probably the one guy on the franchise or one guy on the roster who dislikes Kyrie Irving. They've got to get out of the narrative. Celtic pride. That was a bad movie 30 years ago. Like, that doesn't sell anymore. The Yankee pride doesn't sell. I don't think it does. It does with fans, and it does with media that covers that team that is just got, their head up whoever's ass at this point. But in terms of NBA players, they couldn't care less. They want to know if they have an opportunity to win. Are they going to get paid, and what city they're going to? Those are the most important things for NBA players. Do they have a chance to win? And again, what Danny Ainge said last week, I think he had to move on, because how could he possibly recruit a player? Like, as Kawhi Leonard could opt out of the Clippers, do you think Danny Ainge, with a straight face, all of a sudden is going to recruit Kawhi Leonard? And if I'm Kawhi Leonard's Uncle Dennis, I'm going to say, you're not talking to him. He doesn't think race is an issue. Players in the league are going to laugh at that. That's why they had to move on from Danny Ainge. And I think Brad Stevens, they just don't want to part with $42 million for nothing in return. They could have made him public relations director if they wanted to. They weren't going to let him leave because they owe him $42 million.
So, go ahead, Mike.
I honestly believe, and I hear your point. I hear everything you're saying on the stomping on the logo issue. I don't think it's more so about all the pride and the tradition. And I feel as if, I don't care if you're the worst team in the league, and I don't care what your logo is, what it looks like. It's just a form of disrespect. That's just what it boils down to. If you want to get into, what does the leprechaun mean in the Celtics? Yeah, that's a whole conversation you can have. Sure, it's possible. but it's still a form of disrespect in what he did. The man took his foot and dug in it like there's some dirt on the floor, like he spit some gum, and like it was just a form of disrespect. And it's sad that
but he did that to you on the court that night with 39 points, and he did it again last night in Game 4 where he was spectacular. So that's more disrespecting you than anything, because
true. But he added fuel to the fire. You know what I mean? He added to it. And I don't think I'm a big old school type of guy. Like, I don't care how old you are. If you play for a team, if you play for an organization, and you're currently representing that organization, if a player is going to disrespect it, you have to feel some type of way. And I think a lot of the issue is some people having, oh, he disrespected Celtics tradition and pride. And then a lot of people just say, yo, that's disrespectful. You can't do that. You can't do that to my team that I'm on. And then people have an issue with the fact that no player kind of took that personally. Yeah, is Kyrie still probably going to drop 30, 40 points? Yeah. Are you probably going to get eliminated to the Nets in the next game or next whatever? Yeah, but at least show that you have some kind of pride and you don't take disrespect lightly. So I think that's the issue that I have with the fact that, and this doesn't even stem from that one issue, like that Kyrie stomping on the logos, one thing. Overall, the team was just soft from day one. It's the team filled of soft players. I honestly don't even think Marcus Smart is the same guy who he was a couple of years ago, but that's a different conversation that we can have. And then going back to Brad Stevens and them only sticking with him because of his contract, I don't necessarily think that's the case. I really feel as if, you have an older guy in Danny Ainge who's probably out of touch with what's the current NBA looks like. Brad Stevens, and one thing we can say about these teams over the years, oh, this team loves to shoot threes. They're a three-point shooting team. They don't operate in the paint. Well, that's Brad Stevens' type of system. And unfortunately, I don't know how close Brad Stevens and Danny Ainge work together, but it seems a lot of the times they kept signing guys who didn't necessarily fit the system. Brad Stevens think of some of the random guys who've come through the system over the years. They turned Jared Sullinger, who was a big-time post player coming out of Ohio State. Next thing you know, he's in the league. He's jacking threes all season. But that's just the system that Brad Stevens, that's what he has constructed with the system. And I don't know if Danny Ainge was doing Brad Stevens justice with the type of players he was bringing into the system. Now you have Brad Stevens stepping into that role, knowing the type of system and culture he's trying to build and what kind of team, which kind of keeps up with today's NBA. Like, obviously, the Celtics aren't the Golden State Warriors or anything like that, but that's just what the NBA today looks like. You're coming down on a fast break, you stop at the three-point line, you pop a three. We didn't want to see that from Langford. We didn't want to see that from Ojale. Some of these guys, we don't want to see that from. Maybe with Brad Stevens as a GM who can actually go and examine players more. He doesn't have to worry about too much of the X and O's, but you're just talking about plugging players into the system. I like Brad Stevens' mindset and believe that if he can just focus all his attention to that role and get in the right place to fit the culture he has developed over the last 8 years, I think I sat with it a while, and I honestly can see it working now. The money thing is there too, but I think Brad Stevens might excel more as a GM than he did as a coach in the long run.
I just think, and I've said this before, it's just such an incestuous organization, the Celtics, and like they don't want to fire anybody. They don't want to do anything to get rid or hurt anybody's feelings, who's worked for the team. So it's frustrating in that I feel like they can't move on almost despite of themselves. Why not even have a conversation with somebody else who could potentially be the GM is my question. Why not go say to Masai Ujiri, hey, do you have interest in this? We pay you for it. Why not go to an ex-player, to anybody and say, hey, let's hear your vision for the team. Why immediately elevate Brad Stevens, who has no experience doing this? And again, the experience that he does have is building this roster that was terrible. Why is that the immediate move? I think in terms of where the team is at with the race relations stuff too, to immediately elevate your white head coach to his position without ever interviewing a candidate, a minority candidate, it's a bad look. And I think from just a pure organizational health standpoint, you're trying to hire the best person for the job, period. How, if you're not looking at other candidates, can you possibly know if Brad Stevens is the best person for this job? there's just no way. You've heard one voice and one vision. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean he's the wrong person for the job, but you gave your organization and team no chance to find potentially the best person for the job. College teams do this crap all the time, and it ends up blowing up in their faces because, again, it's such an incestuous thing in college. Why the Celtics are going this route where they're so unwilling to even look externally, it makes no sense to me. It's frustrating. As far as Brad Stevens evaluating players, I do have some sources in the Celtics front office, and some guys I know that he heavily pushed for are Romeo Langford, Carson Edwards, Semi Ojeleye, Grant Williams. Those are guys that Brad Stevens actively wanted the Celtics to draft. Tristan Thompson was a guy the Celtics that Brad Stevens actively wanted the Celtics to sign. I don't know that he has a great eye for NBA talent. I don't want him to build a team like he built at Butler, because that's not the type of team that can compete for a championship in the NBA.
No, I think part of the issue too is that obviously, Jet, you and I, have man crushes on Masai Ujiri, best executive in the NBA, maybe the best executive in all of sports. I maintain that if you can win an NBA championship in Toronto, that's an incredible accomplishment, because you can't get free agents to go to Toronto. But he had the balls to make the move for Kawhi Leonard, knowing that Kawhi Leonard would spend 1 year there. Danny Ainge, I think when he made his two biggest moves, which was getting Kevin Garnett from Minnesota and then fleecing the Brooklyn Nets for those draft picks for Pierce, Garnett, and who was the other player that traded? Jayson Terry. Yes, he's always the guy I always forget, but he's part of that deal. Those were like home runs, right? Those were grand slam trades that he became hesitant to make any other big deals because he needed to win the trade 99.5 to 0.5. Like, he had to destroy the opposition. Like, why didn't they trade Gordon Hayward to Indiana, right, for Miles Turner and Dougie McDermott? You talk about Brad Stevens likes 3-point shooters. Dougie McDermott, who Jet, I think, correctly said is maybe the worst defensive player in the league, but is a great 3-point shooter. Miles Turner led the league in blocks, was a solid defender. Don't you think that would have been better to get in return for Gordon Hayward rather than Evan Fournier, who's, probably a guy who should be your second guy off the bench? But in terms of this, I just don't understand. Like, I just think this is a money savings thing by the Celtics. And look, with COVID the last 2 years, teams don't have the money they had. Now, Rick Grossbeck and Steve Pagliuca have plenty of money, but they also run this as a business. So I don't think they want to just walk away from $42 million. They're going to try this out, see what happens, and you go from there. I'm interested to see who the next coach is going to be. And I know one guy who's been mentioned as potentially the next coach, Chauncey Billups. I think he should have been a candidate for president of basketball operations.
I agree.
The Cleveland Cavaliers interviewed him several years ago after LeBron gave up that title with the Cavaliers and moved on to the Lakers. And he was right there in contention to get that job. I think that's someone that, beyond even being a coach, I think he could be a president of basketball operations. Now you're getting someone who knows NBA talent better than Brad Stevens, is a winner. He didn't play a long time in Boston. It felt like about 2 weeks. It was a few months before Rick Pitino traded him. He's a winner. Like, and now you go get someone in the front office, a man of color. And I think that's something they're going to have to explore in the coaching ranks as well. Because it's just not going to look good when Danny Ainge goes on Toucher and Rich last week. And then we hear comments from 2 years ago where he sounds like someone completely out of touch. And Mike, you said that. I don't think Danny Ainge is a racist. He's a 62-year-old guy who probably wants to golf, spend time with his family, and is detached from modern day NBA players, right? He played 30, 35 years ago. So Chauncey Billups would be my choice. Why didn't they interview him even? And right now he's an assistant coach with the Clippers. Interview him potentially for that job. I think he would have been a really good candidate, or Sam Cassell, both guys that I think are going to be in the running, hopefully, for head coach.
Interview anybody for the job.
Just
why
do
they
it,
interview
right?
Anybody.
Maybe the NBA needs a Rooney Rule, right? Where I'm not saying you have to do this, but I mean, wouldn't that even look good to other players? Like, they say, well, they were considering Chauncey Billups or someone else. It's like the players in the league are like, okay, Danny Ainge is gone. Brad Stevens, who I think some of the players respect, but maybe they fell out of love with, not the players on the Celtics, but throughout the league. And they're like, they promoted him and a team went 500 and seemed to underachieve. Like, what's going on there? What exactly is taking place in Boston? Because I think the players follow the league and go and talk to each other and say, that's probably not the place we want to go. And again, and I'll go back to what, Kyrie Irving did so much damage to this franchise. Whether you like Kyrie Irving or not, I love watching the guy play basketball. He's a magician on the court. He's phenomenal. He carries a lot of weight in that league for some reason, right? I think Kevin Durant, looks at him as the Maharishi Yogi. I think James Harden follows him. I think he carries a lot of weight in the league. He's very close friends with Steph Curry. Obviously, Jayson Tatum adores him. If Kyrie continues to badmouth the organization, and part of that is badmouthing Brad Stevens, they did nothing today. They did absolutely nothing today. It's like they just rearranged the lawn chairs on the Titanic.
I mean, when I look at this situation, I think obviously the next step is who's going to be the next head coach. And there should be no other choice to be head coach of this team but a former NBA player.
Yes.
Former NBA player needs to be on this team. I was asking for a former NBA player to at least be on the coaching staff. I wasn't, because I didn't envision Brad Stevens not being the head coach anymore, but I was at least saying put a guy or two next to him on the bench just to add a different voice. But hey, There's a head coaching vacancy. Now I'm all in on getting a former NBA player to fill that role and be the head coach, because I look at the coaching staff, and in all honesty, I wish they really cleared house. I wanted Brad Stevens to stick around, but I wanted Danny Ainge and all the yes men around him. I wanted them all gone, and I wish they could have got rid of all the assistant coaches, and Brad Stevens could have started fresh and got some assistant coaches who are former players in the league. But we saw what happened today. Either way, you get a former player in as coach, automatically his voice means more. And even if it's a guy like Sam Cassell or Chauncey Billups, who've never officially had a head coaching job before, just due to the fact that not only are they winners, but they played in the league. They played in the league before. Their voice means more to players entering the league. I don't care if it's a rookie. I don't care if it's somebody who's been in the league for several years. You get a coach that is a former player and knows the ins and outs of the league and everything that player is dealing with. It means more. I love Brad Stevens, but I always felt that aspect of who he was missing, and it didn't translate with how he communicated with players. Because at the end of the day, Brad Stevens could tell Tatum or Brown or Kemba or Smart something, and they could look at him like, man, you don't know what it's like to be out there. You don't know what it's like to be out there on this court in front of these fans, running these plays, dealing with the refs. You don't know what it's like to be out there. Yep. You get a coach in there who has done that. It means a lot more. I'm all for Chauncey Billups getting the opportunity, possibly. I'm all for Sam Cassell. Jason Kidd, I go back and forth. Something about Jason Kidd just doesn't sit right with me. I don't know what it is. But Sam Cassell, Jason Kidd, I've heard talks of, you got Jerry Stackhouse, I think has been killing it in the G League. He's been doing a great job. Still, former player. I don't even care if it's somebody who's getting their first opportunity ever. We saw what's happened with Steve Nash. We saw what happened with other guys throughout the league. Give
Penny Hardaway, who's coaching at Memphis in college. Yep. And I think Stackhouse now is at Vanderbilt. So we know that those guys have got their chops as far as coaching. And you brought up the assistant coaches, and Jed, I want to hear what your opinion is on this as well. So Brad Stevens gets promoted to president of basketball operations. If he hires Chauncey Billups or Sam Cassell or anybody else, does that coach pick his coaching staff, or is Brad Stevens going to go, well, one of the stipulations is you got to keep Evan Turner because he seems to be building a relationship with Jayson Tatum, so he's got to stay on. And, oh, by the way, you got to keep this other coach. Does Brad want all of a sudden dismiss all of his coaches and allow the next coach to pick the assistant coaches? Because now Brad's running the show. It seems like a circus-like atmosphere over there where it's like, it doesn't seem like they're all going in the same direction. And Jet, you mentioned it. It's a very incestuous organization. It always has been. Bill Fitch was considered an outsider. He did win an NBA title. The moment it didn't work well, they got rid of him and brought back Casey Jones, who won 2 titles with the Celtics, obviously many more as a player. But it's always been run that way. It's always had the feel of a small mom and pop organization, which, by the way, the Lakers have as well. It's just those are 2 franchises that are just damn lucky that they had all-time great players. That's where all those championships come from. It doesn't necessarily have to be great organizations.
No, Sap, I think that's a good point about the coaching staff too, and it puts Brad Stevens in an incredibly awkward
Right.
position where he hired all these guys and he handpicked them, and now if you're bringing in a new head coach, they should have the right to build their own
Yeah.
staff.
Yes, I agree.
It doesn't make any sense to just insert a coach and say, okay, but keep my staff or
Mhm.
play my system only. Then what's the point of having then Brad Stevens to just do both? If that's
Right,
honestly,
exactly.
if that's
Yeah.
how they're going to do it. And the Celtics are saying, with the Celtics organization, that's two separate jobs. Okay, well, great. It's two separate jobs with the Celtics. So make sure it's two separate jobs. And, tough luck to Jerome Allen and to Jay Larinaga and all those guys. But, I'm sorry. You guys did. If one of you was doing a really good job as the assistant coach, this season maybe wouldn't have been such a disaster.
What is this? The city of Boston, where they're going to put up jobs for bid and okay, you can't be the public works director or the librarian. I mean, just you could create things. You could have Brad Stevens, president of basketball operations and head coach, and then hire a general manager who does the due diligence, the day-to-day work, and you got whoever in the front office. I mean, no one really does that in the NBA. Probably the closest to that is San Antonio, but while Popovich is the head coach, R.C. Buford is the guy who runs the basketball operation. I often wonder who makes the final decision there. I kind of think it's still Popovich. How's that been working out since they lost Tim Duncan and Kawhi Leonard? I mean, again, it's about the players in the league, and that's why you need to find a coach that is going to be able to relate to the players and are going to get the most out of those players. And do you think that you go to Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who are your two young stars, and get their opinion on who they
Me
like
too.
as head coach?
Me too.
At this point, you have to, right? I mean, I know Jaylen Brown's played 5 years, Jayson Tatum 4 years, but this is the way the league works now. So reach out to them. And I know Jayson Tatum has a good relationship, I guess, with Evan Turner.
Yeah,
Maybe
but
Evan Turner
I have no
is the
problem
head
keeping
coach.
Evan Turner as an assistant coach. That's fine.
Yeah.
I don't think he's ready to be a head coach. He just retired as a player, basically.
Yeah, he's very young.
And so let's if they want to groom him and he wants to be a special mentor to Jayson Tatum, that's fine. But you don't have to completely get rid of everybody on the staff, especially because Evan Turner's like the 8th assistant on the staff.
Right.
So it's it
He's
doesn't
on
really
second and
matter.
third row. Second and
Right.
third
He's sitting with the fans. And so
He just gets along with Jayson Tatum. That's his job. Just keep Jayson Tatum happy.
he was sitting all the way back with the guy who threw the water bottle at Kyrie. That's where his seats are.
No, but in all honesty, I think Tatum and Brown, and especially those, I was going to say Kemba and maybe Smart, but you don't know their situation if they're trade bait. But Tatum and Brown need to be the ones sitting down with Brad Stevens, analyzing who the next coach of the team is.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, those are the two stars. They're going to be here for the foreseeable future. They need to have a say on who they want coach.
And isn't that also an uncomfortable conversation? Because they're gonna be like, well, what are you looking for in a head coach? Well, we'd like somebody who played in the league, somebody hopefully a black man. And Brad Stevens is like looking at himself in a mirror. You're basically describing the opposite of me, guys. And they're like, well, we didn't really like playing for you the past couple of years.
Big boy pants and have that conversation, because at the end of the day, I honestly believe when you have your star players having a say on who they want to coach, I think that's huge. That's huge for a team. You obviously want somebody your star player or players are going to be comfortable with. So yeah, it's going to be somewhat of an awkward conversation, but why you wouldn't want Brad Stevens to just pluck somebody out and put him there, and then you got Tatum and Brown like, oh, why did he choose this guy? Like, come on.
No, of course not.
4 years and 5 years in the league now. They're still fairly young, even with that many years in the league. They're still fairly young, but they're stars. Jayson Tatum's a superstar. Jaylen Brown's an all-star. You have to have them have a say on who's going to be their coach for the next 3, 4, 5 seasons.
Yeah, they need to sit in on the interviews at the very least, and give their thoughts and need to be heard, because it's a players' league, and everything you can do to make your players happy, especially if they're star players, and try to keep them around for as long as possible, you should, go above and beyond. That's just the way the league works now. I know a lot of people don't like it, but you have to play the game, and the Celtics need to adapt to, this model of the NBA. So I have a problem with Brad Stevens being promoted for doing a bad job. Brad Stevens getting a job he has no experience doing. Them not interviewing anybody else. And unfortunately, head coach is important in the NBA. It's not an unimportant position, but GM's a far more important position. And I don't think that they did their due diligence in finding the right person for this job. Maybe he's great. Maybe they hit a home run. But I know for a fact they did not flesh this search out as much as they should have.
What's a big thing for a general manager in the NBA is to recruit free agents.
That's the biggest thing.
Does Brad Stevens have any juice? You're a pending free agent, right? Now we get
Good
to
at losing
July
free
1st.
agents.
Well, the whole
not his fault.
organization's really good at that. But I'm a free agent. I'm Kawhi Leonard. And you know what? The Clippers lose to Dallas, and I'm tired of LA after 2 years. I'm going to opt out. I'm going to sit down with Brad Stevens in Boston and Pat Riley in Miami. Where am I going? Who's got more juice?
Yeah, obviously Pat Riley. That's the easy answer. But I don't. It doesn't seem like Brad Stevens is viewed around the league as a bad guy. And I know Jet keeps saying he did a bad job this season, but overall he coached 8 seasons in total. Would you yeah, they didn't win a championship. Okay, cool. Let's get that out of the way.
Give him a B.
I'd give him a B. Yeah, I think he's been a good coach. I do. I think
has he done necessarily a bad job as a head coach of the Celtics? No, not necessarily. And I don't think he's viewed around the league as a bad guy.
No, there was a time where he was considered, after Popovich, the best coach in the league. Now, that might have been a bit much, especially the Bridgies, because he was getting a team to the Eastern Conference Finals with, kind of role players, right? I mean, Isaiah Thomas, you had, playing on the with injuries and going forward from there. You had, Kelly Olynyk had a huge playoff series against the Washington Wizards. I mean, Terry Rozier had a nice postseason. You got to the Eastern Conference Finals with, kind of spare parts. But then, Jet, you pointed this out going into the 18-19 season. I don't know if he can coach stars. And you're right, Jet. It may be an issue there. Because my biggest issue with all of this, though, and I've said it a million times, is the roster construction and the roster mismanagement by Danny Ainge. I mean, going into the summer of 2018, you had Kyrie, Gordon Hayward, and Al Horford, all stars. You had 2 brilliant young players in Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. You had role players that were damn good in Marcus Smart, Marcus Morris, Terry Rozier. That was perhaps the deepest roster in the NBA and not too far off from being the best roster in the NBA. Hell, Marcus Morris was your 8th best player. He's currently the 4th best player on the Clippers, and they may win the title. True. So that's roster mismanagement. Now you have Tatum, Brown, Marcus Smart, who I think you have to move on from at this point. You've got to. There's going to be a sacrificial lamb at some point. They're going to have to move on from a player. It's not going to be Jayson Tatum or Jaylen Brown, I don't think. Kemba Walker's not tradable. Robert Williams, there's value there, but he can't stay healthy. Marcus Smart makes the most sense. He's got a decent contract. There'll be value there with some team that's close to contending that looks at him as a nice piece to add. So I think you have to move on from Marcus Smart, but you have nothing left from that roster from 2 years ago when it looked like they were in prime position to contend for a half a dozen years. And Anthony Davis was on his way, apparently, until he wasn't.
Yeah, Sap, less of an issue. I mean, I have a massive issue with that, obviously. I mean, that's a humongous failure. The bigger issue I have than that even is that look at this past offseason, and the James Harden trade was at the beginning of the season. This is what those guys went for. Harden went for a buttload of picks, basically. Yep. Chris Paul went to the Suns for a buttload of picks. Drew Holiday went to the Bucks for a buttload of picks. You had that. You've chosen to instead use them and take guys like Grant Williams and Romeo Langford and Aaron Nesmith instead of bundling all those assets and trading them for a player who is good and upgrading the roster. You took a chance on yourself and said, I can nail all these draft picks, and he botched them all. So the problem is they had the assets to go out and get a really good player because that's the going market value right now for really good players. Just send a lot of picks forward. And they chose not to do that because of either internal arrogance or laziness. And so the Celtics instead, let Ainge hang around. And now they promote Brad Stevens, who in my mind has been part of this problem too. If he was really pushing back on these decisions from Danny Ainge, I think we would have heard a lot more about it.
Yeah, no, every time you see video of Danny Ainge with Brad Stevens, I wouldn't say he's intimidated by Danny Ainge, but he seems to be somewhat in awe of him. And Danny Ainge is a guy that everybody likes and respects. As a player, he was a balls to the wall type of guy. I mean, Jet, I know you love those tenacious ball players. If you were following the Celtics in the 80s, he probably would have been your favorite Celtic, not Larry Bird or McHale or Parrish or anyone else because they're too talented for your taste. Danny Ainge would have been the perfect Jet Stryer guy. So, yeah, I think that
Greg
they
Kite,
both
I like
deserve.
him.
Greg Kite, yeah, absolutely. Fred Roberts with the bad haircut. I'm sure you would have loved him. But you look at all of these guys, and they both failed, and yet one is being promoted. The other one, I think, is being shown the door. What did Milwaukee give up for Drew Holiday? And then I've become like the biggest Drew Holiday fan.
Eric Bledsoe and some
All of a
picks.
sudden, yeah, I mean, you couldn't have offered something. You couldn't have offered Marcus Smart and picks for Drew Holiday. You don't think you'd be a better team? I mean, because Drew Holiday is a guy who every time I watch him, all I can think of is Joe Dumars or Chauncey Billups. That's who he reminds me of. That type of player, leader, tough, defensive player, clutch shot maker. That's exactly what this team needs. Now, in free agency, I looked at the free agent class in 2021, and unless Kawhi opts out, it's not a great class. Would a player like Kyle Lowry, I know he's 36 and looks to be out of shape because he kind of plays that way. He's kind of a pudgy guy, and nothing wrong with being pudgy. Kyle Lowry, would that be a guy you bring in as a leader, who won a championship and has that type of leadership ability? So now some of that leadership abilities off the plate of Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who may not be natural leaders. I mean, is that someone you go out and sign? I don't know what it would take to sign him. But the only problem with that is you're stuck with Kemba Walker's contract, and he's never going to be the player he was. So they're really in a tough situation.
At the end of the day, as great of players that we see out of Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, their voices aren't loud enough. And I know the whole saying is, people have different ways of being leaders. Some lead by example, whatnot. It seems as if the Celtics have nobody. They don't have anybody on that roster who has a true voice to be a leader. I know Tristan Thompson somewhat has a loud voice, but this is his first year with the team. He's not necessarily a star player. So, Tristan Thompson, cool. Marcus Smart, like I said earlier, I don't necessarily think Marcus Smart is the same player or guy that he used to be. I think now he sees himself more as just a big offensive three-point threat. And he's not that at all. I don't know how much a vocal leader he is in the locker room, but I think the team needs to start looking for, if it's not going to be a coaching staff, you have to start adding loud voices to that locker room.
But how many leaders are there in the NBA? Like every team may have a leader, but how many true leaders are in the NBA? It's like every baseball team has a number one pitcher, but not necessarily an ace. I can count on probably one hand, maybe two. How many true leaders there are. I mean, you start with LeBron, you go to Chris Paul. Those are the first two guys I think of. Steph Curry.
I'm talking about loud voices. Like Marcus Morris, when he was here, was he a leader on the team? Not necessarily, but his voice was going to get heard with those.
Yeah, but don't you have to be good to have a loud voice? I mean, I'm not saying Marcus Morris isn't a good player, but to be that guy, don't you have to be a little bit more than the 8th best player on the team?
I'm pretty sure if the Celtics tried hard enough these last couple of seasons, they could have found a guy who can just be a serviceable role player. Yeah, he's not dropping 20 points a game, but could have been more serviceable than Taco Fall and Grant.
Oh God, yeah.
You could have found somebody who could have easily fit those roles, took those minutes, and had a decent voice in the locker room.
Danny Green from Philadelphia. He's not a real vocal guy, but he's got 3 championship rings with 3 different teams, so he can stick the rings in your face if you've got an issue with him.
Like this team, there's no reason why these Celtics teams, especially unless you're going full rebuild mode, there's no reason why we should come June and July stress about the draft, especially these last couple of seasons. I don't give a damn who's coming out of the draft because the Celtics team shouldn't be in a rebuild mode. And Danny Ainge has continued to fall in this pattern of, we get the most out of our team. We can get to the Eastern Conference Finals, but let's still try to draft 4, 5, and 6 guys in the upcoming draft. Why? For what?
Just trying to hit a home run. Trying to hit a home run instead of trying to get a double.
Yep. But that's what he continued to do. And amongst various reasons, that reason is a huge piece as to why it wasn't working out for him here. I don't know why he kept feeling like he wanted to find the next diamond in the rough. And if it wasn't trying to draft people, he was going overseas and wanted to take Yabusele and Wanamaker and Vincent Poirier. Like, what are you going after these guys for, Danny Ainge? To do what? Where are these guys now? What have they added to the team when you thought you was going over there and finding the next great foreign player? Like, it didn't work out.
So many great foreign players. Danny's managed to find the bad ones.
Oh,
He's excellent at doing that. He's really good at doing that. No,
it's almost like the Bruins. The Bruins never draft Russian players. Like the league, the NHL's loaded with Russian players from Alexander Ovechkin on down. The Bruins can't quite ever find one.
Oh, they like Canadian players. That works out.
Yes,
too.
I guess so. Them and Don Cherry.
The biggest problem, leadership. This is a secondary issue. The main issue is the roster.
Yes,
is devoid of talent. It's a bad roster. You have two excellent players. One guy may very well end up being a superstar level player. The other, in Jaylen Brown, I think may continue to be a perennial all-star. That's a good starting place. But from the rest of the roster on down, it's really not good. You have no depth. You have your other starters aren't necessarily quality starters. I like Marcus Smart a lot. I love him. It's come and gone. It's not working anymore. He's more valuable to a team that's closer to a championship.
Mm-hmm.
I think in order to get this roster back to where it needs to be, you need to take some steps back, unfortunately, and trade off some of these things like Marcus Smart and stuff like that. Try to maybe attach them to the Kemba Walker contract and get that out of here. You got to really look, okay, we'll keep Brown, we'll keep Tatum, but then everything else needs to be completely on the table. We need to reconstruct how we're going to do this, maybe acquire some picks so you can then deal those picks out for more players. That's the problem, sir. They had the two players and they had the picks. Instead of using the picks to enhance the roster, Danny Ainge said, I am the smartest GM in the league. Brad Stevens says, I was just coaching in college. I can evaluate college talent. Let's take a chance in the draft and find another superstar, and then we'll really be unbeatable. And it was a dumb plan, and it's backfired on them because like I said, of institutional arrogance that they have. And that the ownership enabled that and is continuing to enable that with here. That's why I'm not a fan of this, because I just don't see it as any sort of meaningful change. I don't see how Brad Stevens is going to be very different from Danny Ainge. Maybe he'll be a little bit more active, but I think the scouting is still off, and I don't see how he's going to recruit, which to me is the biggest part of being a general manager now.
Absolutely. Masai Ujiri, but I'm sure that the phone call was never made. And I don't think Masai Ujiri, I keep hearing reports that he's going to re-up with Toronto. He's not going to re-up with Toronto. Any organization, look, the Lakers, I'd love to see the Lakers go get Masai Ujiri. Anyone that got Masai Ujiri would improve right away. I mean, he's that good an executive, but yeah, it's just a weird thing, isn't it? I don't know if we can compare it to anything else where the guy running things, quote unquote, as I use air quotes, retired, but don't be shocked if he's back in the league in a year or two. There are reports that he bought property in Utah. Now, he played at Brigham Young University. He's originally from Oregon. He's a god in Utah. He was a great player at BYU. I guess he's close or friendly with Ryan Smith, who's the principal owner or the principal governor. I don't want to offend anybody. The principal governor of the Utah Jazz. And maybe they bring him on board as an advisor, although you got Dwayne Wade as part owner there. So who the hell knows? I don't see Danny Ainge just necessarily walking away. Again, you can be in an advisory role. I thought that's what was going to happen here, where you make him president emeritus and you just, pay him $3 million a year to be someone who greets people and whatever. It's like a lifelong job. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, just Danny, thanks for being great to us. They didn't even offer him that. I don't know. It's just a weird day. It's just weird. It's like, really? It's almost like you're going through a divorce, but you know what? We're going to stay in the same apartment and we'll talk future about who gets custody of the kids, and maybe you can visit them on weekends. And I don't know. It's just a little bit tough to process.
Yeah, it's tough. And I mean, as wide as the conversations can get as to why it happened, what led into it, did someone have beef with another person? The biggest step that the Celtics, it's a huge step. It's the dawn of a new era right now. Danny Ainge is gone. The Danny Ainge era is over. It's 18 years, bunch of Eastern Conference Finals appearances, one NBA title, made 2 Finals appearances. Cool. It's over. Thanks, Danny, what you did, but it's over. And I think the first piece that's going to fall in this new era is who the hell they choose as the next head coach.
Yeah.
That's the biggest piece that's going to come from this. And they, depending on who they choose, the conversation is going to go in various directions. But if the Celtics really want to show that they're putting the best foot forward and trying to, because I think the consensus is not, most people aren't probably too upset at the fact that Brad Stevens is the GM now, because I don't think Brad Stevens was a hated guy. Was his coaching questionable at times? Sure, people will question it, but the fact that he slid it in the GM mode, it's more of why? It's not more so why they do it's more it's head scratching, confusion. How the hell did he get to be the GM? But he was gonna he's not the coach anymore, so there's a position open.
Now we both agree. We all three of us agree that Chauncey Billups or Sam Cassell would be great choices as head coach. I think that those are all slam dunk candidates, right? We've also heard.
Jackson?
What's that?
Mark Jackson?
I love Mark Jackson. I love Mark Jackson as a commentator. And the narrative will be, as soon as he left Golden State, they started winning championships. But I think he taught them a lot. I think he helped Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, because they have nothing but good things to say about him. And Scalabrine was one of his assistants. I know someone's
they hate each other. They hate each other.
Mark Jackson and Scalabrine
hate each other.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And I don't want to hear about Kevin Garnett and Kendrick Perkins. First of all, Kendrick Perkins is making more money sitting in his living room, in front of the set of the Olive Garden, having a great time and doing a great job. Garnett's not going to coach.
No, he
wants to own a team. He wants to own a team. He doesn't want to coach a team. It's like, okay,
they should, sell a mistake.
Cut him into ownership. Yes, sell him 5% for whatever the hell that comes to. He's got plenty of. No, he's not going to coach the team. What's he going to have strippers on the bench with him and rubbing his head?
He'd be a very popular coach.
It'd be a very popular team. That'd be awesome. It would be like be like having, I don't know what to compare it to. But two names that have been talked about are women, Carol Lawson and Becky Harmon. Now, I'm all for it because this is an organization that's always been at the forefront of all changes, right? First black player, first black head coach, player coach, and Bill Russell, first all 5 starting black starting lineup. Like, fine, I'd be for that. I think the players would respect those women. Carol Lawson was here for 1 year as an assistant coach.
Yep, they loved her.
They loved her, and I think if there's any sport, and I don't want to start putting people into generalities, I don't do that, but work with me on this. I think of the 4 major sports, the athletes most open to a woman head coach would be basketball players.
Yeah, I think the
league is progressive more. Yeah, I mean the guys love the WNBA. They're starting to invest in that. I think like football, I don't think that would work.
Mike's getting upset. He hates the WNBA.
No, it's not that I hate it.
I'm not a huge fan, but
go ahead, Sam. Go ahead.
No, it's not that I'm a fan of but the players love it, right? I mean, you could probably impress more. You go get a soccer coach, right? Because that's actually what Steve Nash is. I thought Steve Nash was going to start coaching soccer before he coached basketball. Like Kevin Garnett and Kobe Bryant and all the players love soccer. Go get a soccer coach. Who's ever the best soccer
Ted
coach.
Ted Lasso, Sap. We're not going to.
Yes, exactly.
Really turn it into a circus.
I know that. Well, you know what? If maybe it's absurd, it'll be worth viewing. I mean, they're not going to win a title anytime soon, so be absurd.
That's depressing, Sap.
Be crazy. I know.
You can't just throw up your hands and say they're not going to win a title anytime soon. They need to make moves that are getting them in contention to win a title. Every move they should make.
Hire a soccer coach. Who's Mourinho? Isn't he the best soccer coach in the world? Go to Foxborough and get the guy who's coaching the Revolution right now.
Or just Bradley. Is that his name? I forget.
No, the Italian guy.
Oh, Bruce Arenas.
Bruce Arena. Yeah, get Bruce Arena to coach. Whatever. Bring Belichick in to coach.
Belichick, I'm sure would figure it out.
Yeah, he'd probably tell Tatum and Brown to leave town. He doesn't need them.
Yeah. So the next head coach is obviously a huge domino to fall. That's important too, and I think it's important culturally for the Celtics to try to diversify a little bit and become, one, less incestuous. So hire somebody outside the organization, and two, I would like to see them hire a minority candidate. I think that would go a long way in trying to repair some of the damage that Kyrie has done to the team. But I would be fine. I think Becky Hammon or Kara Lawson would be a fine choice as the next head coach. I think that that's probably better for a team that has a little bit more stability than the Celtics have right now.
Bingo, Yahtzee, Jets. That's exactly what I was going to say.
So you think Becky Harmon supplants Greg Popovich at some point in San Antonio?
No, I wouldn't even think that's a good situation for her.
Yeah.
Or if, somebody retire, I don't know. I think the Celtics, there's so much volatility now with the Celtics. The roster is bad. You don't know. The ownership seems cheap. You got the former head coach hovering over you as the GM now. I just think I want Kara Lawson and Becky Hammon to be in a position to succeed. And I'm not sure right now that this huge effort and undertaking it's going to take to get the Celtics back to a good place is a position for them to succeed.
Jet, you mentioned something about the Celtics being cheap, and I'm going to pound that story. Is again, Brad Stevens, they're on the hook for $42 million. They're not just going to fire him and have to write that check. So now you're president of basketball operations. It was like a promotion, as I use air quotes. And also think back to, remember at the trade deadline, Daniel Tice, they just had to give away because they didn't want to pay him. Salary dump. I mean, not that I was a big fan of Daniel Tice, but you know what? They could have used some of his size. You put all your eggs in the basket of Robert Williams III, who can't play more than like 4 consecutive games, and Tristan Thompson, who doesn't really fit today's NBA. Not that Daniel Tice is a great player, but he can go out and hit threes. He's a little bit more mobile than Tristan Thompson, and you just dumped him to save what, $3 million or something like that. Like that's
well, look at the amount of second round picks you have on the roster, Sap. I mean, those guys make below minimum money. I think they're. I texted you this the other day, Sap. I think of the 4 major teams in Boston: Red Sox, Patriots, Celtics, Bruins. Well, now they don't have a coach, but I think Brad Stevens was the worst coach. I think they had the worst GM in Danny Ainge of the 4 major teams currently. I think they have
Don Sweeney hasn't won a Stanley Cup, but I think he's built a pretty good roster here. I mean, he had a disastrous draft in 2015. He had 3 consecutive draft choices, and none of them turned out to be good. But
look, they're competing for a cup this year, Sap. They were in the cup 2 years ago. And
you're going to put Chaim Bloom over Danny Ainge? Chaim Bloom over Danny Ainge? I mean, he hasn't done anything yet. Right now, they're playing good baseball, but Danny Ainge has been a good general manager.
Jury's out on Chaim Bloom. Fine, that's fine. I could have put Danny Ainge ahead of him, but I think that Alex Cora has proven more as a manager than Brad Stevens proven as a coach.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, Alex Cora has done wonders with the Red Sox, and look, Bruce Cassidy, I absolutely love. He's my favorite coach in the city. He's so blunt and great that he calls out players
But worst ownership group in the city, Sap, I think.
I can never get the Bruins out of my mind. Talk about cheap, but they haven't been recently.
They haven't been. For about 20 years. They haven't been.
Yeah, they haven't. That narrative is an old, tired narrative.
They've spent money.
No, they've spent money. They go right up to the cap. The reason they didn't want to spend it is because the Bruins ownership, Jeremy Jacobs, he's the one who wanted a cap and was ready to spend it. He just needed to get things like in writing. The ownership is like the Patriots just went out and spent $160 million guaranteed on free agents. And here are the Celtics worrying about $3 million for Daniel Tice. And now they're not going to just fire Brad Stevens because they got to save $42 million. And again, they don't own their own building. They're the only team in town that doesn't own their own building. COVID really damaged the NBA the last 2 years. TV revenue down and obviously money at the gate down. And that's a big part of bringing in those dollars.
I'd also like to see, I think there's levels to this. What James Dolan and the Knicks is like, he's insane. And like, there's a level of impatience there that doesn't make sense. But I'd like to see this ownership group have a little less patience than, look at what's going on now. They're going the wrong way. Yeah. Getting to the Eastern Conference Finals in perpetuity isn't where you want to be. You want to be getting to the finals. Too patient. So you don't want to be James Dolan, but you don't want to be this, where now they've been so patient and trusting of Danny Ainge and not getting involved and staying out that they've squandered these assets and chances. You've been passed by Philadelphia, by Milwaukee. But Brooklyn has, passed by you, lapped you, spat on Lucky the Leprechaun, and, continue to go. The Knicks are on a better trajectory right now than you are. So these teams that you were laughing at have now passed you by. And it's because of inaction on ownership in a large part too, because they've been too patient and too trusting of Danny Ainge saying, yeah, I got this figured out. You see this ring from 08? That's what you need to trust right there. Well, it's 2021 right now, and the Celtics are nowhere closer to a championship than they were 10, 12 years ago, Sap.
Mm-hmm.
They've taken several steps backwards. And,
Yeah.
You would think they would be right there in the mix with the Milwaukees, the Brooklyns, the Phillies. And if when last season ended in the bubble, the Lakers won the championship, if you were to say, all right, what teams are probably going to come back firing on all cylinders out of the East? Obviously, you figured Brooklyn would be at the top there with Irving and Durant. You didn't know Harden was coming. We're just talking about preseason. Brooklyn would be there with Irving and Durant. Milwaukee still Milwaukee with Giannis and Middleton, and Philly still there with Embiid and Simmons. And then and Celtics are there with Tatum, Brown, and you'd assume Kemba. You thought those are the top 4 teams that's going to be battling all season long.
And Miami, you had to not throw them out because they did beat you last year, and they have a good roster, but not a great roster.
Not a great roster, but they just seem to play tough and play well together. And I think Spoelstra's a solid head coach with Pat Riley behind him. So you figure those are the 5 teams that's probably going to be battling at the top of the Eastern Conference.
Right.
One team decides to fall not just 1 or 2 notches below. They fall all the way off where now you're relegated to being talked about in terms of, well, can they get past Atlanta? Can they get past New York? Can they play well against Washington? Like, sorry teams in the bottom of the Eastern Conference, or at least, when we're talking about the seeds, battling for the 8th and 7th and the 9th and 10th playing teams, that's where the Celtics were. They had no business being there. No business. You get that close to being in the NBA Finals, you should only be ascending. The dissension for the Celtics was so mighty. It's I still can't fathom how badly they fell off this year.
Mike, that's the sort of stuff that happens when your team's like aging out of it. Yeah. You're like, okay, oh yeah, our stars are getting older. It makes sense. They're past their prime. We're a little bit worse. Their stars should be just getting better and better and better, but the roster got worse and worse and worse around them. And so they completely went down to this. I want to say this too, guys, because I just thought of this. Why make the announcement about Brad Stevens taking over as the head of basketball operations now? I just don't see how that's advantageous to them. Couldn't they have done, obviously I've been saying they should have done more of an extensive search, that goes without saying again, but if say a team has a job opening for a head coach and Brad Stevens says, you know what, I'd like to coach in Indiana, that gives you the ability to trade him or let him go without looking as bad necessarily as an organization. Maybe you save some money there, but now you've already given him a title in a new job and a new position without looking at other candidates and not seeing how the dominoes fall. There's still 2 rounds of the playoffs left to be played. Well, and the first round's not even over. It's just over for you. And then the finals before you even get to free agency and the draft. What was the sense of urgency in needing to announce Brad Stevens as the guy today?
I think ownership is all in on Brad Stevens. Say what you want about how bad he coached last season. They're all in on that guy because I firmly believe, and like I was saying earlier, they believe he has a great basketball mind. How it translates to how he's a coach with players and deals with, egos and personalities, that's a different conversation. But
he's got, incriminating pictures of the ownership group.
Or he's got a 6-year, $42 million contract that they don't want to write off. That's still the biggest issue here. It's like, we'll put you in that place. I still think, and it would look kind of foolish, but in a month, if the Indiana Pacers or whoever says, hey, we're interested in Brad Stevens, what would it take? We'll give you a 1st-round pick. You release him from his contract. Now you're out of that $42 million obligation.
That would look kind of today. Why'd they do it?
Maybe to just lend stability, if that's the right word to use, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe they didn't want to leave him hanging, and by just not making some sort of announcement. Okay, Danny Ainge is resigning. Like, okay, what's next? Or he's retiring, whatever phrase you want to use for that.
have done like say we're gonna have a press conference today, ownership group saying, we're gonna do an exhaustive search, and then say, even in like 2 weeks or a month, say, you know what, we've talked about, we think Brad Stevens is the best guy for this job. But today, that's the decision they make the day after the season ends.
I think this was rushed. But here's the thing I don't like. All of a sudden, everybody that covers the team is like, oh, this has been in the works for months. Well, why didn't you say something in the last several months? If you're a reporter and you knew this, all of a sudden now you go, oh, this really isn't a surprise. It's been in the work for months. The only person that said this was Jackie McMullen on a podcast with Bill Stevens about 2 months ago. Other than that, I've heard nothing. I think Gary Washburn, who I think does a great job covering the team for the Globe, it did say that Brad might be more involved in personnel decisions, which, do you jump to the conclusion that he goes from coach to president of basketball operations based on that? Maybe he's going to be working more in partnership with Danny Ainge going forward in the draft and free agency. Not quite that he's going to all of a sudden take over and Danny Ainge is going to permanently go to the golf course. So I think this happened quicker than we think. And I still think it goes back to Ainge's comments last week. I really do. I think Wick Grossbeck at that point said, holy crap, what did he say? He sounds like Donald Trump here. He's saying, I never heard of any racial issues in Boston in 26 years, and I don't pay attention to it. He sounded like a cranky old guy. And this is a league that's 85% black. How is he going to recruit free agents? And Wick was like, ooh, that's not a good look. Danny, maybe your time is past, and we're going to move on from you. We're going to be gracious about this. And you know what? Brad will promote him to president of basketball operation. I think this all came together in the last 4 or 5 days. I don't think this happened like 2 months ago where there was this grand plan. What happens if they had a run in the postseason? What happens if they get back to the vaulted Eastern Conference Finals? And at that point you go, we knew it wasn't going to happen. Obviously, we watched the Brooklyn series. They're not up to speed with that team. Not that many are. But yeah, I think this kind of, again, Kyrie Irving has done a lot of damage to this franchise on and off the court.
But you talk about, how would they recruit free agents knowing that, Danny Ainge made those type of comments, for the most part, you're going to be making a free agency pitch to a black player. I think another reason why probably Wick and amongst various reasons, another reason why Wick and the rest of the ownership group felt comfortable with Brad Stevens is because since things started falling out with all the racial injustice issues happening and going on, Brad Stevens has been very vocal about it, and
he's been great.
He's been great. The comments he's making, backing his own players and Jaylen Brown.
Absolutely,
he's been huge and has never held back what he had to say. And for the most part, everyone's looked at his comments and go, all right, Brad Stevens, you're making great comments out there, being pressed in front of the media, and if that's the type of player that GM that players need to come across. If you're sitting in a room with Tatum, young star, Jaylen Brown, young star, and Brad Stevens, a player, a GM or a former coach that seems like he's for the players, and players somewhat like to play for him, and he's in touch with what's happening in the world
right
now.
Yeah,
it seemed like a happy situation. Get millions of dollars. You play for the historical franchise in the Celtics. I know Sappy saying that doesn't mean much anymore.
That doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't.
You really don't think players?
No, not at all. No, because look at the free agents they got. Al Horford and Gordon Hayward and Kemba Walker. Those were nice signings, but those aren't really like upper echelon superstar free agents like Kevin Durant or LeBron James or Kawhi Leonard. Those guys weren't coming here. And you couldn't even, and you knew at this point that you had your eyes on Anthony Davis, and then his dad was turned off by the way that Ainge treated Isaiah Thomas. So if that's what we're going to believe. So even if they had traded for Anthony Davis, would he resigned here? Maybe not. And the only way you were getting him if Kyrie Irving was able to sell him on Boston. Kyrie, again, is respected by the players. And if he's turned off by the Celtics, the way they run things, and the players in the league talk and they run the league, I don't see how you're going to get free agents. Now, again, I think Brad Stevens, I give him all the credit in the world because he's been great through all the racial issues the last year since George Floyd. Even before that, he's really supportive of his players, and Danny Ainge never really felt like he was even interested in that stuff, and that doesn't work well. I mean, look at Greg Popovich, who's been better than Pop or Steve Kerr, and I think that you could say that Brad Stevens has been right there with those guys, and I think that's very impressive and it's important. But yeah, I this is a mess. I really do. And look, I mean, he could. I want to see who they hire as coach. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. Yeah, that's a big part of this.
Because, say what you want about Brad Stevens and him getting promoted and should he have gotten promoted. At the end of the day, the coach is going to be the one taking on the brunt of the media and how to construct this team and how to make it successful moving forward. Yeah, Brad Stevens is going to have his hand in, picking and choosing the players. But when it comes to actual games and running plays and the X's and O's and practicing,
it don't matter though. It's still the president of basketball operations has to construct the roster. That's the most important. I mean, look, I don't know if Steve Nash can coach or not, but they were able to put that roster together somehow, and that's why they're the favorites to win the NBA championship.
Coaching in the NBA is more about managing personalities than anything.
Exactly. Yeah. The X and O part of it is, I think the stars can pretty much handle all that stuff. They know what to do.
And I think that's important. The managing personalities is important in being a mediator. And clearly Brad Stevens didn't do a good enough job at that. I just listen, like you said, Sap, the GM's job is to construct the roster and to be able to scout effectively. I don't believe that Brad Stevens has shown that he's been able to scout NBA talent effectively. And I don't think that he has shown the ability to know how to construct a roster. One, because he hasn't done it. And two, the roster he has constructed was back when he was a college coach at Butler. And, he was sort of hamstrung with recruiting because it is a small school. But for some reason, I think he's been trying to duplicate what he did at Butler in the NBA. Guys that are Brad Stevens type of guys. High IQ, maybe a little bit lower in the talent level, but can play. Hey, Grant Williams, stick in the corner, set a screen, shoot a three. You cannot win an NBA championship that way. You cannot build Butler in the NBA and expect to be a championship team.
Do you feel? Let me ask you guys this: you felt that all the moves that Danny Ainge was making as GM, Brad Stevens definitely had a say in a lot of it, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if you get, for example, Chauncey Billups or Sam Cassell, the way these rosters are somewhat, Brad Stevens is going to have a say, but now you're having voices and opinions of a guy who was in the league. Don't you feel as if now we might see somewhat of a different constructed roster? Because at the end of the day, yes, Brad Stevens has the same constructed roster, but a Sam Cassell or Chauncey Billups, they're going to be the ones coaching the players. And you can't necessarily force a coach to coach force a coach to have this play on the roster if it's not going to work. You know what I mean?
But a system doesn't matter unless you have the players to execute that system. The triangle offense is wonderful. It really worked when you had Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. It really worked when you had Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal. They made it work.
Maybe that system's out the window now. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, and again, he may have had some institutional knowledge of players in college, but he hasn't been in college for 8 years. When Pete Carroll left USC and ended up with the Seattle Seahawks, he had a big hand in the first few drafts with the Seahawks, and they hit home run after home run. Hell, Richard Sherman in the 5th round, future Hall of Famer. Russell Wilson a few years later in the 3rd round. So they were hitting on all their draft choices. But as time went by, Pete Carroll was not as connected to college football, so that institutional knowledge that he had didn't exist anymore. Brad Stevens, maybe 7 years ago, was more in tune with the college game than he is now. So I think he would have been better in that position 7 years ago, not necessarily as general manager, but as kind of a co-GM with Danny Ainge. He's going to have to learn on the fly here. And look, I think Brad's a bright guy. I love his temperament. I think the guy should run for the U.S. Senate. He'd be fantastic as a U.S. Senator. But this is another different skill set that I don't know if he has or doesn't have. Like, I don't know what his relationship is with all the GMs. I think Danny had to go because I think his relationship with the other GMs had become toxic. No one wanted to do a deal with him.
That's true,
because I mean, Kyrie Irving, would stomp on Lucky, and Danny Ainge literally tried to stomp on every other general manager in the league. And I think they all said, screw you. We're not going to deal with you.
Yeah, and I think you need to be actively working the phones all the time. You need to be in tune with all the rumors. You need to not let a player who is a type of player that you need slip through your fingers. Trades that you can count countless trades that the Celtics should have made the past couple of years that would have maybe gotten them over the top into the finals instead of the Eastern Conference Finals that could have been had at reasonable prices. I think last year we were looked at it, and especially in the bubble, it was such a weird year. If they had just bolstered their center position a little bit more, they really could have beaten Miami and gone to the finals. And then who the hell knows? I mean, I still think the Lakers probably would have beaten them, but you don't know for a fact.
At least you're in the finals. You lose in the finals. It's better to lose to LeBron and the Lakers rather than Jimmy Butler and the Heat. I mean, it's a bigger accomplishment to get to the finals than to lose in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, and I've been saying this for a while. It seems like Ainge had been asleep at the wheel. So if you're going to look at, if Brad Stevens is going to be more active, then that's an upgrade by fact that he's younger and more active. That's good. But you're right. He doesn't have any relationships with any other GMs. He needs to forge all these. He doesn't have any really college connections anymore. So the scouting sort of aspect of it doesn't really matter. And he has no sort of understanding of the cap, which I know Mike Zarin's there and he's really good at that sort of stuff. It's just, this is a brand new job for someone who's never done it before. And you hired him on the fly. And it's also weird in that whoever you're hiring to be your replacement as coach, you were just the coach of the team. So that's going to be a strange dynamic between those two people.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's going to be Brad Stevens, like looking over your shoulder all the time. It's not a comfortable situation.
You mentioned how Danny Ainge obviously lost his fastball, and I think it still goes back to 2 years ago when he suffered that second heart attack during the Milwaukee series. From that point forward, when that hits you, and you're 60 years old at the time, now 62, 6 kids, 17 grandchildren. Look, on this one, listen to the old guy. It changes your perspective when you have something like that happen to you. Life changes for you. So I don't think he was as engaged. He seemed to be aloof with many of the situations. And it just came to a head last Thursday when he's on the golf course talking to Toucher and Rich, saying he knows nothing about racial issues in Boston. To me, the worst of all of this was he was not aware of a post by Marcus Smart in the Players Tribune. Someone in that organization had to know that Marcus Smart posted that in the Players Tribune. It was very well written. And then Marcus put forward something on Instagram about a 2-minute video. I knew about it, Jet. You knew about it. I'm sure, Mike, you knew about it. And we're just, 3 guys doing a podcast. Someone in that organization has to be in charge of keeping in touch with and being in tune with what the players are doing and feeling. And that person should have gone right to Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens and said, Marcus has this in the Players Tribune. This is kind of concerning. Maybe we should talk to Marcus and try to make him more comfortable, whatever the case may be. When he didn't even know that, I don't want to hear that. Like, I didn't want to hear that Joe Paterno didn't know what was going on at Penn State. And I don't want to hear that Bill Belichick didn't know what was going on with deflated footballs. When you're that guy in charge and you come across as a know-it-all and someone who, feels the pulse of the organization, at some point you can't say, I really don't know what was going on, because it doesn't work. Can't have it both ways.
I think you're dead on, Sap. Ainge did such a good job getting the team to winning a championship from when he took over in 2003 to 2008. He built that thing from the ground up, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. But he was working on borrowed goodwill for the past 10 plus years now.
Yes.
And it's run its course. It's time. I think, listen, thank you for your service, Danny Ainge. I appreciate the title, but it was time to move on. The biggest problem I have in all of this isn't Danny Ainge going. It's that the timing of hiring Brad Stevens, why they think Brad Stevens is the right person for the job, and how anything's going to be different now, because things need to be different. They're headed down. They need to be headed up.
Don't you think that Bill Belichick would, not that he cares, but don't you think Bill Belichick would like to have as long a leash as Danny Ainge? 1 year with a losing record, everyone's down his throat. This is a guy who, whether you think it was Brady Belichick or Belichick Brady, produced 6 Super Bowl titles. Don't you think the Boston Red Sox would have liked to have that long a leash? The Red Sox have won 4 World Series the last 17 years, which is 3 more than Danny Ainge and the Celtics. And yet every turn the Red Sox get bashed by the media, the fans.
New manager, new
GM every time they have a sub 500 season. Meanwhile, there's Danny Ainge, 1 title, and 13 years later, he's finally gone. And he had opportunities. He was right there to build another really good run. and didn't finish the job. And again, I think this all goes back to Kyrie Irving. He blew this thing up on his way out, and he continues to blow it up now. He right now is the biggest villain of the Boston Celtics. And you know what? I think he's comfortable being that guy.
Yeah, the Kyrie Irving situation didn't help, but I think there's still far more situations where Danny Ainge could have helped this team that kind of overrule the one Kyrie Irving situation where I think Danny Ainge screwed up. And at the end of the day, he just is. I wouldn't even say that he had a proper vision for this team. He just knew that he had Tatum, Brown, but you couldn't really tell what the vision of this team. The fact that we sit here and prior to all these moves happening, it's like, okay, what does this team need to do now? What can they do now? What can they figure? If you're Brooklyn or Philly or Milwaukee, I mean, obviously one of those teams is going to make the finals and the other two are going to lose. But you can see from those, they're not too far off from tweaking their roster a little bit and coming back better. The Celtics need to make several moves to just be in contention in the East, let alone the NBA Finals, even though they were that close last year. And it just seems as if Danny Ainge, he lost it. And I don't know, you brought up, the heart attack from a few years ago, but there was obviously a different fire from when Danny Ainge built the big three. And I always say this, he built that big three. You got Pearson, you got Ray Allen and Garnett, and you thought, okay, they were cool and they filled the team up. No, he went out and got veteran guys, Posey, Cassell, Eddie House, PJ Brown to fill out the roster. And they had two young guys coming off the bench to help out a little bit in Big Baby and Leon Pope. You fast forward now, it's not quite the same situation. It's a little bit of a reverse situation. You have two young stars who clearly can somewhat get the job done. Why not add the veteran pieces around them to just help elevate them and be a voice in the air? Instead, you want to continue going through the draft, and all in all, it's been nothing but a failure year after year after year.
Look at Chris Paul in Phoenix, right? I mean, they had DeAndre Ayton last year. They had Devin Booker last year. Now, they're both better players than we were a year ago, but not that much better that all of a sudden they're the number 2 seed in the Western Conference. Give credit to Chris Paul. You go out and get a veteran player. That's why maybe Kyle Lowry is someone you explore, but I don't know how you do that financially when you got Kemba Walker on the books for $35 million. They're in a tough spot. And cheap owners, yeah. And I'm telling you, that's part of it. It really is. I don't know how well financed Wick Grossbeck and Steve Pagliuca are. I mean, we laugh at Jim Dolan. He's got endless money. The Buss family's not as rich as we think. They've made their money by owning the Lakers. Jim Dolan's made his money by owning a lot of things. Mark Cuban's well-financed, all of that stuff. Maybe this is an ownership that's underfinanced at this point. And, how do you not that, again, I'm a big fan of Daniel Tice, but he could have helped down the stretch. He could have helped in the
Brooklyn series. You don't want to see
series.
any
You're not beating them, but go cheap.
Out.
Yeah, you never should. I mean, it goes back to Mookie Betts, which that's a whole different issue. I don't know, maybe they talk contract, but they always seem to be $100 million off, which is being cheap. Yeah, you don't want to see that. And especially the Celtics, who I think create a lot of money, but all NBA teams working on a different model the last couple of years because of COVID, not able to sell tickets. That's a big hit.
So sell the team, then I would say. I need to figure out a way to make a couple $1 billion pretty fast.
Your grandfather should have bought it back in 1983.
I know, when my family had money instead of me just doing podcasts for free now and not getting paid anything.
Well, then you could be the GM. Mike could be the head coach, and I'd be the whatever.
Yeah, that's what you'd be. You'd be the whatever.
The whatever. The Laker guy or the LeBron. I'd go recruit LeBron. That would be my only job, is to go recruit LeBron, who right now doesn't look like LeBron anymore.
You might be able to get him.
Don't count him out.
So listen, I think now if we keep going, we're just going to keep talking in circles.
Yeah.
It seems like if we were to rank it in terms of the three of us, I think it's the worst idea. Sap a little bit thinks it's a little bit better than me, and then Mike thinks it's a home run. He thinks Brad Stevens is fantastic.
I'm optimistic with Brad Stevens as the general manager. I'll say that.
Okay.
All right. I'm pessimistic. I just want they need a culture change, and I want new people in here. I think that's how you get a culture change, is getting new, fresh ideas. This isn't a fresh idea. This is somebody who's been here for 8 years. You're not getting rid of Austin Ainge. You're not getting rid of Mike Zarin. I don't know what the coaching staff is going to look like. Maybe you'll get some fresh ideas there, I hope. But they need to, when your refrigerator starts smelling, you take out the bad food and you throw it out. You don't just say, all right, we're going to move this spinach that's rotten over to this corner. Maybe that'll help it smell a little bit. No, that's not how it works. If something's not working, you replace it. You don't
you buy a new
or
refrigerator.
buy a new refrigerator. So
Yeah.
I think there's still a lot to go. This was obviously a big development. A lot of things need to change for the Celtics. I don't know if they will, but we'll have to see what happens. Sap, you and I will be back tomorrow talking
Yes.
about your Lakers and talking about some of the playoff series, maybe about some
Do
of
we have to?
Dame Lillard's heroics, even though they came up short last night. I was screaming. I woke my wife up twice watching that game. I regret nothing. Yeah, we're going to talk about a lot about your Lakers tomorrow because the Celtics took a good bashing today, and your guy deserves a bashing tomorrow. Mike, maybe I think you might join me on Friday. I know Sap's going out of town to protest Barry Bonds not being in the Baseball Hall of Fame.
I'm going to the Baseball Hall of Fame on Friday. I've got my Barry Bonds shirt ready. I will storm the Baseball Hall of Fame until my guy gets in. He's only got 1 year of eligibility left. It's a shame that Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, the best player in the history of the sport and the best pitcher I've ever seen, neither is in the Hall of Fame.
Make a little shrine or something while you're out there. That's the closest he'll get to being.
Oh God, Mike.
Make a little shrine.
Oh, well, Dustin Pedroia is not getting any either.
Burn sage. Work for Kyrie.
Oh my gosh, Sap.
I got Mike on that one. Actually,
that's Mike's guy.
That's Mike's guy. You know what? Pedroia broke all of Bonds' records at Arizona State because they both played there.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he's clearly the better player
back then. So.
Well, stop it. None of that's been proven. Now, the thing is I remember in 2007 when the Giants came to town and I went to the games at Fenway, Bonds' first at bat, I've never heard anybody booed quite like that in my life. I mean, it was just like Kyrie Irving would have shit his pants if they booed as loud as they booed Barry Bonds, who ate that stuff up because he had the same mindset of Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant and Tom Brady. They're sociopaths. They just boo me, great. I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to rip your heart out. And the first pitch Bonds saw, he hit about 550 feet. I was down near the right field foul pole. It was a home run. They called it foul. I saw it go right over the foul pole. That's a home run. But it was they never seen a ball hit that far. They didn't even know how to judge it, and they just called it foul. But he had a great time and ate up the crowd and all that stuff. But later in the weekend, he hit a double. He's on second base, and Dustin Pedroia is there standing next to him. Was about up to his waist. And Dustin Pedroia, I know they had some sort of relationship because they played at Arizona State. And he's like, sorry, I broke all your records. And Bonds just started laughing. It was like he was talking to his child. But, we got to get Bonds in the Baseball Hall of Fame. I know I've gone off on a tangent here. But if you think I like LeBron and Aaron Rodgers, Bonds is my guy, my favorite athlete of all time.
All right, guys.
Maybe I'm a sociopath. I don't know.
Maybe. That's going to do it for us at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Again, we are joined today by Mike Molyneaux, who is always a blast to have on the show. And hopefully this summer we'll have him on more because he doesn't have to be around his children as much.
That is true.
And so plenty to talk about. Obviously, a lot is going to happen in the offseason. We still have a lot of playoffs left to go. And the finals race seems as wide open as it ever has, with the exception of the Nets, who I still think are going to run through everybody. So lots of more to talk about as this progresses. Obviously, we were Celtics focused today, but it made sense. So we will be back tomorrow. Me and you, Sap. Me and Mike will be on Friday, I believe, and plenty of NBA content. So check us out on Spreaker, on Full Press. Was it Full Press Network, Full Press Radio, everywhere that podcasts are found. Mike, where can people find you?
Check me out on Twitter at Mr_Mike Nice. Rolling my co-host Marvazon, Double M Media. Follow us on Twitter, IG, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Double M Media. Check us out.
Mike gets great guests too on this show, Sap. I don't know if you saw it. They've got they've gotten some old friends of ours. Yep. Kyle's on the show, good amount, right?
Kyle Draper, yeah.
Decent guest. Tommy Kern came on to talk some Patriots draft and NFL season coming up.
Did you have Cedric Maxwell the other day? Did I see?
Did have Cedric Maxwell. Who
nice.
Talk everything with the George Floyd murder and the Derek Chauvin case. Like, he came on and blessed us with a really great episode. Told us some stories, some untold stories. I don't know if he's ever told anybody, but he blessed us with a great episode for sure.
Great.
Check it out.
That's awesome.
It's out there right now. Check it out for sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mike's really building something awesome there. So make sure you check all that stuff out. And you can find Sap on Twitter at JohnSap25. Find me at Jet Stryer. And our YouTube is youtube.com/Jet Stryer because I need all the views. I'm very selfish in that way, but we don't have a show account. All right. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. Sap, thanks as always. And I'll talk to you guys later. See ya.